hung around arcades in the mid-80s, Gauntlet is probably one of the first names that pops into your head when you think of multiplayer games. Its name handed down to each generation of gamers thanks to its 9-sequel legacy. I made tons of fond memories playing Gauntlet Legends with my dad when I was a wee lad, venturing on to Dark Legacy and Seven Sorrows when we got the PS2. The story had to start somewhere though, so I wound the clock back to 1985 to take a look at the game that started it all. Gauntlet is an overhead fantasy-themed running gun that lives up to its name. There are restless hordes of ghosts, grunts, and diabolical demons that clutter every corner they're given the opportunity to claw their way into. Challenging them, upwards of not one, not two, but 4 aspiring heroes professing in different skills. There were cooperative 2-player games like this before, but 4-player teams were unheard of outside of the nerdiest computer clubs, let alone having specialized roles directly inspired by Dungeons & Dragons. You could choose between the warrior, the Valkyrie, the wizard, and the elf, each bearing distinct advantages and disadvantages. And you are heavily encouraged to cover each other's weaknesses with your individual strengths. For example, the slow lumbering warrior can take out most enemies merely by touching them with his immense strength, but the wizard's bullets whiz across the screen at the speed of light to make up for his frailness. You combine both of them as a team, and your disadvantages are well offset as long as you have somewhat decent coordination. This created a solid blueprint for all future team games to follow, and it's easily Gauntlet's greatest accomplishment in the industry. Your favorite MMO of choice, Left 4 Dead, Borderlands, they all owe themselves to Gauntlet. People could finally become their heroes, risking their lives for fame and fortune. You weren't just reading about it in a book or listening to some nerd blather on about how awesome your lucky dice roll was. You got to dodge demonic breath in a test of your wits and reflexes rather than your imagination. Thus, there are many cases where nerd and jock finally found something in common, kicking monster ass and delving as far into the depths as they could possibly go, giving Gauntlet its legendary reputation. Now, the perceptive ones among you probably noticed I'm praising Gauntlet's innovative ideas rather than the game itself. For good reason! It sucks, especially by today's standards. Let's go back to the construction analogy. The blueprints, being the ideas for the game, are thorough and immaculate, while the construction crew did a really shoddy job building the house, cutting many corners. The first 7 levels actually had thought put into them because first impressions are important, especially when there are unproven, untested ideas on the table. You and your buddies can have a blast taking strategic positions to cut through enemy lines, as the game introduces its mechanics one step at a time, beginning with the essentials like keys and potions, and becoming more complex and labyrinth-like as the exits become harder to find. Then the moment you start having fun, levels 8 through 100 happen, ditching any semblance of level design, dumping hundreds of enemies in really tight corridors, and calling it a day. All that strategy you might have formed before with positioning, completely out the window. Have a long hallway where you can't do anything against bullets being hurled from the other side of the wall. You wonder what caused Gauntlet to fall apart so quickly?
Oh, warrior is about to die.
Atari didn't just change action games forever. They also did thorough research on how to gouge as much money from players as possible. Like a splendid red dragon, I know. It doesn't even try to hide its exterior motivations, asking you to dump another quarter into the machine the second your health starts getting low. Gauntlet was one of the first arcade games that allowed you to boost yourself in the middle of your game rather than being balanced around 1 credit. And boy howdy, Atari took full advantage of that. That voice telling people that they could stay in the game longer by ponying up more cash during desperate situations proved to be a goldmine for arcade operators. Everyone wanted to try this crazy new game that wasn't like anything else. It could have been the game itself, or it could have been the business tactic. But regardless of the reasoning, it was a direct influence on all other arcade games from that point forward, for both good and ill. Say, making continues more normalized in Japanese games. There's a massive problem with that mentality though. When you can just buy your way through the obscenely difficult sections, there's no incentive for the mappers to build more engaging levels. That's exactly what Atari did compared to the average Konami game copying its design. Konami still put thought and consideration into most of their games for a better player experience. And even though they weren't as profitable, they aged far better for it. Why put careful thought and consideration to where all the hazards are if you know you can squeeze one more coin out of building an impossible monster corridor, easing the workload of the developers too? That is the mentality that bogged Gauntlet down compared to its future competitors. I don't know about you, but I feel more accomplished playing a video game when I win through my own skill and knowledge of the game, which is why I make a big deal about one credit clears. I also understand the appeal of just wanting to plow through hordes of filth with nearly infinite health to let loose tons of frustration, but if that's what you want, you have plenty of better options than Gauntlet nowadays. The point I'm trying to make is, even though I adore Gauntlet as one of the most respectable moneymakers of its time, its eagerness to eat coins does not translate to deep and engaging gameplay. Oops, your shots suddenly kill your friends after level 10. Why so suddenly when it didn't harm your friends before? F you! Give me money! But the most egregious example of careless game design comes from its randomization of levels 8 through 100. You can get into situations where if a player dies and loses all their keys, you can't go any further in the game. Atari knew about this. They realized it was a problem after its location test. So they created a safety net. If you wait around 190 seconds on any level, all the walls turn into exits to prevent a soft lock. Considering how you run into these walls of monsters where your choices are run into danger and lose 200 health, or do nothing and the game wins itself, doing nothing is legitimately the smartest thing you can do. Great game, Atari. Don't mind me, I'm just gonna play the Gradius cabinet next door where I'm encouraged to actually do something. In the end, our generation found Classic Gauntlet a serious waste of potential. But I'm still thankful it created said potential for other developers to capitalize on. Despite my protests, Gauntlet was still a super successful game. So inevitably, a sequel was released a year later in 1986. It's more of an expansion pack than a new game, even being advertised as a conversion kit for your old Gauntlet cabinets to bring new life into it to make it exciting again. I might as well knock that out of the way too, when it's most relevant. The biggest improvement number 2 makes over the original is in the variety department. More Dungeons and Dragons inspiration seeped its way into the level layouts to create more interesting challenges beyond hordes of enemies. Which is definitely welcome. Being attentive for suspicious-looking spots on the floor to avoid traps, timing your step through these force fields just right, and even using your brain to figure out block puzzles to make pathways to exits. It should have made the levels less repetitive in theory. There's also the occasional bonus round for you to discover by fulfilling random objectives that the game gives you on specific floors, which is also a great idea that gave earlier arcade games more longevity. I also have to give props to it for allowing you to choose any character you want regardless of what side of the screen you're playing on. Not only is it a good idea to keep a game playable if any parts on the machine break, but it also allows some form of strategization by letting you choose whatever combination of characters your team thinks is best. Too bad the level design still sucks! All these new features mean nothing because you're still forced to squeeze through narrow corridors that have invincible enemies in them now. Yay! Level 7 represents the whole game. There's millions of monsters behind the 4 gates, no room to dodge all of them, and you're gonna take an assload of damage no matter what you do. The biggest problem with the original deliberately wasn't fixed. I think one of the random messages that pops up in between levels pretty much tells you everything about the amount of thought that went into this game. Extra food appears if you play with 3 players, but this is the 2-player version, you fools! Alas, Gauntlet 2 is also a wash. There will be a time when the Gauntlet series achieves greatness, but this is not the time. Gauntlet 1 barely passes with a C- for its stroke of genius, but Gauntlet 2 fails with a D+. Thank you for watching the video. If you thoroughly enjoyed it, I could use your support now more than ever. Feel free to subscribe and hit the bell next to the subscribe button, because I will be following this up in the future. Peace and long life, everyone.